All right, let's jump right in. We're going to explore something that, well, it might sound a little strange at first, how an ancient religious text, the Book of Deuteronomy, can actually act as a startlingly clear mirror for understanding the political and religious history of the United States. It's a lens that reveals some of the deepest, most foundational currents in the American identity.
And that, of course, brings us to the central question for this whole explainer. I mean, really, how can a document from the Bronze Age Near East possibly provide a useful reflection of a 21st century global power? Well, the answer isn't about some kind of direct prophecy, not at all. It's about recognizing these profound thematic parallels that have shaped the nation really from its very beginning.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to establish our core metaphor, this idea of the Deuteronomy mirror. Then, we'll dig into the powerful concept of America as a chosen people. After that, we'll explore the role of covenants and their consequences. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at some really crucial cautionary lessons for our world today.
Okay, let's start with our central idea, the Deuteronomy mirror. Think of it as a way to understand a nation's reflection in this ancient text.
Now let me be super clear about this. We're not arguing that you can just take ancient law and apply it one-to-one to today. That's not the point. Instead, think of Deuteronomy as an analytical tool, like a kind of cultural and theological template. It helps us see the deep structures of thought, the core stories America has told about itself over and over again. It reflects the very architecture of the nation's civil religion, and maybe even the source of some of its most enduring internal struggles.
So let's turn to the first major reflection we see in this mirror, America's chosen people narrative. This is such a powerful idea, this concept of a nation with a divine mission. And you could argue it's the most significant parallel we're going to look at. It's shaped everything from foreign policy to national identity.
So, to really get this, we have to understand the original biblical idea of chosenness. As it's laid out in Deuteronomy, it isn't about being inherently better or just getting some divine favor. No, it's about being selected for a very specific and pretty demanding purpose, to be bound by a covenant and to serve as a moral and legal model, a beacon, if you will, for other nations. It's a status that's defined just as much by responsibility as it is by privilege. This exact idea, it was grabbed with both hands by early American settlers, especially the Puritans. They would read verses just like this one and see themselves in the story. You know, in their own minds, they weren't just colonists looking for opportunity, they were a new Israel, setting off on a sacred mission into the wilderness.
And this comparison just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? It shows the direct translation of that theology into a national story. The biblical promised land became the American New World. And that call to be a beacon to all nations? That was famously rephrased by John Winthrop as creating a city upon a hill. This wasn't just fancy talk. It was the foundational myth for the entire colonial project. And this is the crucial takeaway here, how this single theological idea just spread out, embedding itself into the very DNA of the nation. On a national level, it gave birth to the secular idea of American exceptionalism, this belief in the nation's unique role and moral authority. And that, in turn, provided a powerful theological reason for political projects like westward expansion, which got rebranded as Manifest Destiny, a divine command that, as we know, came at a horrific cost to Native peoples.
All right, that leads us right into our second big theme, which is totally intertwined with the first one, covenants and consequences. This is all about the sacred agreements that define a people and the perceived price for breaking them.
At its core, a covenant is simply a solemn, binding agreement. Now, in a religious sense, it's between God and a people. But in a civic sense, it's an agreement among a community that lays out their laws, their responsibilities to each other, and at the end of the day, their collective identity. And this concept is absolutely central to both Deuteronomy and American public life. And here we see another just fascinating parallel. The Deuteronomic idea of a divine law given at Sinai, the thing that bound the nation of Israel together, well, it has a secular counterpart in the United States. The Constitution functions as a foundational covenant, a social contract for the people. And if you think about it, debates over its original intent often carry the exact same kind of weight as theological debates over Scripture.
So, when you think in these covenantal terms, you get a very powerful and frankly very intuitive story of cause and effect. If the nation keeps its side of the bargain, if it's righteous and just, it's going to be rewarded with blessings. But if it breaks that covenant, it's going to face curses, it's going to face judgment.
And this exact framework has been used all throughout American history to make sense of major events. From the pulpit, from the political stage, times of national prosperity have been praised as proof of God's favor. And on the flip side, huge crises like economic depressions, epidemics, even the Civil War itself, have been framed as divine punishment for the nation's collective sins, especially the sin of slavery.
But, and this is a big but, this is where the mirror shows us a much darker reflection. Because the very act of defining who is inside the covenant, who counts as the people, is also, by definition, an act of exclusion. This push for a distinct righteous identity has historically required creating an other, someone who is defined as being outside the covenant and its protections. You see, this dynamic echoes Deuteronomy's own anxieties about mixing with foreign peoples. In the American story, it's shown up in these recurring waves of nativism against one immigrant group after another. It's shown up in restrictive laws designed to keep a specific ethnic or religious majority, and in this persistent political fear of diluting some kind of perceived national character. It's a really tragic and deeply rooted theme in the nation's history.
So, looking at all this history, where does that leave us now? Well, it brings us to our final and, honestly, most critical section, cautionary lessons for today. What does this ancient mirror reveal about the challenges we're facing right now? From everything we've looked at, it seems like 4 key lessons really stand out. First, we need to be critical about this idea of chosenness. Second, we need to interrogate the relationship between our laws and our morality. Third, we have to be really careful to separate faith from political convenience. And fourth, there's a powerful call to prioritize the most vulnerable people in our society.
The first lesson is basically a direct warning. Having a sense of national purpose can be a good thing, but an uncritical belief in being chosen, that can turn into arrogance really fast. It can create a huge moral blind spot where the idea of being uniquely blessed gets used to justify injustice and oppression. We saw it with manifest destiny, and we saw it with slavery.
The second lesson shows us that law is really a double-edged sword. Of course, laws are essential for justice and order, but we always have to ask, are our laws truly serving justice for everybody? Or are they being used to enforce conformity, to protect existing power structures, and to exclude certain groups? It's so easy to lose the spirit of the law by sticking too rigidly to the letter.
And that brings us to a really crucial point. There is this powerful tendency to sacralize political goals, to basically claim that God is on your side for what are, at the end of the day, just partisan policies. This mixing of God's will with a specific political agenda is dangerous. It kills debate, it makes compromise impossible, and it can lead to a really rigid and intolerant kind of fundamentalism.
And this last lesson is maybe the most enduring and the most challenging one of all. For all its harsh parts, Deuteronomy comes back again and again to this theme of justice for the marginalized, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. The text suggests that the ultimate test of a nation's righteousness isn't its military might or its wealth, but how it treats its most vulnerable people. And what's so powerful is that this call for compassion isn't some abstract rule. It's rooted in collective memory, in empathy. This verse is a powerful reminder to a people who were once outsiders themselves. It's an ethical command to offer radical hospitality and to stand up for those on the margins, grounding justice in a shared human experience.
So, at the end of the day, Deuteronomy's mirror shows us the deep origins of America's greatest hopes and its most profound contradictions. It reflects a past that is very much alive right now in the present. And the final question it leaves us with isn't just about what we see in that reflection, but about how what we see is going to shape the choices we all make for the future.